Here we go. Docker, my friends, is built on a technology called LXC, which stands for, wait for it, Linux Containerization. Yeah. So, something like this, a bat file to run Docker, is an abomination against nature, in my opinion. That's right. I'm going to say it again. Let me say it again. It is impossible to run a Docker container, a Linux container on anything but Linux. But Mr. Rob, I use Docker all the time from the container on Windows. No, you don't. You're using Linux. You just can't tell. If you install Docker Desktop, if you install Docker for Mac, or if you install Podman or any of these things, all of the technologies, every single container, if it's running a Linux container, if it's running a container, we'll drop the Linux from the word because people, there are containerization things in other, jails comes to mind for BSD and stuff like that. But containerization, as referred to by everybody in 2024, a container only runs on a Windows kernel. Think about that for a second. Hey, Pylang. Think about that for a second. Let that soak in. Let that really soak in and curate into your brain. I think the most important thing, gee whiz, dude. It's because of the camera. I have a better camera now. The most important takeaway from this little rant of mine is that every time you think of containers, you need to immediately think of Linux. And every time you have a problem of any kind with a container, you need to eliminate the layers. By layers, I mean Mac or Windows, and run it on Linux. Because every single technology that you use in order to run a container is using a machine, a Linux kernel. And that means you've got a little itsy bitsy virtual machine built into Podman, built into Docker for Windows, Docker Desktop. They all have their own little virtual machines in them. And then, the thing I find is really interesting about that, ventilating the room will also help. The thing I find really fascinating about this is that people they'll have an aversion to run. They'll say something like, well, I want to use containers because they're lighter. And then they'll run Docker Desktop or Podman Desktop on their Windows machine. But they wouldn't be bothered to run a Linux virtual machine on there and install Docker on there. Oh, hell no, that's way too heavy. It's too bloated. It's the same thing. It's the freaking same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Calm down, Rob. It's the same thing. So don't give me I just want to use a lightweight container on my Windows machine. By using a container on a Windows machine, you are fundamentally forcing your system to use a virtual machine. It's just hidden from you. It's just tiny. It's relatively trimmed down. That's fair. But you can trim down your own virtual machine and just run Docker as God intended on Linux in a machine that you can actually get into. And then you don't have all the problems with dealing with with all the problems with dealing with the bat files not translating the command line stuff directly. This is a sin against nature. Running a bat file and doing Docker, and if you haven't been burned by this, I guarantee you will be. Because something about the backslashes or the escapes in the command line from a Windows command line you're trying to run Docker will eventually get in the way, and it won't translate over. That thing also has to be interpreted, and then it gets shipped off to the internal VM, and then the command line stuff gets all screwed up, and you're like, why isn't my thing working? Because the slashes are in the wrong place. You've probably fought with this already. I'm telling you, you probably already fought with this. Don't do it. So that's the takeaway from this video. Understand this. If you have a container, you have a Linux kernel. You already have a Linux machine, so you might as well install your own and control it. That's all. Bye.